And a very warm welcome to everyone. This is a session today which I'm personally thrilled about, and I'm thrilled about it because it's always a real pain for me when I'm working on consultancy projects, trying to come up with some kind of a marketing strategy. When the knowledge about the market is just a little thin, shall we put it this way, and when we're having to do guesswork about the marketing triangle, this next chart you can see right now. So what is our customer about? Who are we even talking to? What are their needs? How do they get information? What is their attitude towards us? What are our competition up to? And how do we match with that? That is how we build the basis of the marketing strategy, right? And it's very important in that context to know the trends in the market, what trajectory the market has, what's going on, and the regulations, different developments. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to have Keith Hays with us from Bluefield Research, who's spent his whole life working exactly in this area. And it's an area which, when I'm doing my work and lots of our colleagues and people are on the call are doing their marketing work, needs to really dovetail very closely into the market insights that Keith can provide. And secondly, we have Alisha with us as well. And I met Alisha for the first time last November at Aquatech. And Alisha is a part of a startup in the water space. It's more of a B2C product, but the mechanisms are exactly the same. When it comes to market research, she actually went to Aquatech in those days when we could go to physical events, and was doing a lot of market research there on the ground and talking to lots of people and finding angles for what she is promoting to the marketplace. So delightful to have that case study on there. But I'd like to first start with Keith and say a warm welcome to you, sir. And let's have you just talk a little bit about the need for market research. Why?
Yes, thank you. And I've been doing it my whole life, which sounds a little bit like a sentence the way you you put it out there. But it is exciting, obviously, to wrangle with questions for shaping a business plan, right? So at Bluefield Research, what we do is try and help our clients, whether they're geared towards the consumers or towards industrial customers. We do work primarily with utility customers and larger industrial players, is how to understand their market. So, I think, and even entrepreneurs as well, folks such as Alisha here, in terms of how to understand your market. So, I think what I want to do today is just share a few points about some common challenges that we see a lot of our clients having, and some trends we see in terms of how they tackle them, and let Alisha take it from there in terms of providing a more concrete example as to how that all comes together. So what are some of the big questions, right? I think a lot of times we have clients who come to us who maybe have a product, but they're looking for a market for it rather than perhaps developing some kind of solution, because you're already thinking about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Yeah. So I think a lot of times, developing a solution in the water sector, everybody needs water, right? And that's pretty straightforward. But there are obviously a lot of nuances there in terms of the way that water gets delivered, the way that the wastewater gets treated. There are a lot of questions, and there's this vastness in the water space, which created opportunities for a company like ours to be born. And when I say vast, it's very difficult sometimes to get very precise information geared towards your product or solution in the exact market that you're looking at with a comparable business model to the one you're thinking of. So, I think for us, the vastness of the space means you really have to have a pretty good idea as to what problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. And that problem may be created through environmental regulation. It may be just out of water scarcity. It may be because there are increasing contaminants in water that require greater levels of treatment. So there are lots of problems, obviously, for us to try and solve out there. And so, that's obviously the first thing. It seems like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how many companies, maybe it's because they had it initially clear what they were doing, but as they got deeper and deeper into the product development process, or were doing other things to try and get cash in the door versus trying to develop some more strategic positioning in the way that they are developing their products, they didn't really think about that. So what is it that you're trying to solve, right? And then
Let me just touch on that very briefly and
sure.
share, the experiences we've had of the past few sessions. And I think, Tom, some of the Aquatech sessions you've done as well. We've often had, inventors come up with some really bright ideas and get very frustrated, really, by realizing that, sometimes they're just missing some of the key market drivers. That's the one thing. And we had in the pitch, the session we did a while back with Victoria Edwards from Fido, she was talking about the fact that they actually developed their product almost live after they'd started pitching it. And they had to do a lot of reiterations, also using the innovation labs and some R&D with customers. But they'd realized, even though they'd come up with a really great product to start with, that it still needed a lot of adaptation to be suitable for purpose. And I guess what you're offering there is also a shortcut to try and get ready for market a lot sooner and not waste so much time and effort and money on R&D.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good segue, Andy, because that's where the rubber kind of hits the road, right? And it's also where good ideas go to die when they don't really understand how the market works and how it may or may not adopt that solution. So, I mean, and that's definitely a trend that probably a lot of you have seen. There's a lot of great technology out there that may or may not be already applied to the water sector, whether it's sensors or membranes or chemicals or different pieces of hardware and software. There's great technology out there. And a lot of times the issue isn't really the product itself, but it's how the market absorbs it, right? So that's where we come in and try to understand and help clients understand a lot better what they can expect in terms of trying to get into specific markets. What are the existing solutions out there that they can position with reference to, or try and create a different market for themselves, which is harder to do, but that it has been done. So, I think for us, we spend a lot of time interviewing different potential customers to understand, what are their needs and what do they really think of some of these new technologies coming onto the market. Do they think that it's adoptable or not? And sometimes they bring up stuff that obviously you never heard of. And, obviously the best entrepreneurs are ones that listen very, very close to their customers, and don't just listen and try and get them to understand why their technology is great, but really show some flexibility in that tweaking process that you're describing, Andy, where you are essentially integrating all that input from the customers and turning it into something actionable and making your product more marketable. And that is really the tough thing. I mean, I came from a career previously in the energy sector. I worked in renewable energy for a while, and before that in telecoms. And there was definitely, I would say, a shorter timeline between when a product was launched and when it could reach mass market for a lot of different technologies. And with water, it's more complicated. We know this, right? I mean, you guys probably hear constantly, it's a sector there's a lot of inertia, and it's slow to adopt to change, and it's very bureaucratic, and there's a natural monopoly that is supplying the infrastructure for water, right?
Well, let me ask you a question about that, if I may. I'm sorry to
Sure.
keep interrupting
No,
the
it's
script,
great.
if you like. But
No, I don't have a script here. I'm just staring at paper, making it sound like I prepared a lot more than I did. So.
Well, you have it all in you. But talking about that sort of knowledge, perhaps in the water sector, we always hear quite a lot, and I think that Victoria said that as well on the session, that it's very difficult to get certainly utilities to say, this is exactly what we're looking for. This is exactly what we need. And even though in certain markets they are heavily motivated by the regulator, if you look at the UK, to express their innovation needs and say, this is where we're going, this is what we want, to try and foster it. But it seems, I mean, I know energy as well fairly well, and it seems that there's a more reluctance in the water sector to just simply express that. Do you feel that when you're interviewing some of these end users of water? And how does it compare to the industrial sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely there's a segmentation in the market between those companies or customers that are early adopters. I mean, you always see these curves where whatever you look at, right? There's the early adopter and then the quick follower and then laggards, leaders, whatever you want to label it, right? And there do exist these leaders in or pioneering innovative utilities, right? I think one of the issues though is that the people who really appreciate the technology don't always have the budget authority or necessarily the buy-in from across different stakeholders within an organization to get them on board. And a lot of things can trip up the technology quality itself with getting adopted to market. And that may be because of, if we're talking software, it could be some sort of legacy system that they have to migrate off of. If we're talking hardware, maybe they're not sure about the maintenance of it and they're concerned that this is going to cause a lot more problems for them. So, I think purely on a tech basis, do utilities appreciate, wow, that's really cool, that data visualization or digital twin or all that cool stuff we hear about when we go to conferences or trade shows like Aquatech. They, on the other hand, I think everybody has that other voice in the back of their mind saying, okay, but how do we clear this through these different hoops in terms of getting it tested and approved and certified and over the budget hump, so to speak.
And how about industrial water users, food and beverage, or I don't know, oil and gas, and those guys who use water, are they a little bit quicker, a bit more receptive, a bit more open about their innovation needs, maybe?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, the nice thing with industrial, well, first, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind with industrial customers. One is sort of their regulatory environment, right? Because most industrial customers, they want to operate as profitably as possible. And so they don't necessarily invest in advanced treatment for discharging wastewater out of the goodness of their heart, right? They're doing it because there are strict enforcements of certain levels of contaminants in their effluent, or they're being forced to use less water because of the regulation of the water rights they have on wherever they're withdrawing from, right? So I think whether or not they are quick to adopt, it all comes down to money in the end, a lot of times. And that money can be expressed in terms of avoiding regulatory penalties and staying compliant or not. But then there are also issues around adoption that force them to act quicker, right? So like with water scarcity, I think we see a lot more use of water reuse systems on the industrial side because they're the lifeblood of a lot of industrial processes, right? And if you're in a place like in the Middle East, or if you're in certain places in India, for instance, where you pretty much have to operate through zero liquid discharge policy and procedures, not because of the regulations, so to speak, but more because that's all the water you're going to get, right? So I think scarcity and regulation are huge drivers for adoption. And I also say bureaucratically, yes, they are a bit more nimble, right? One thing is going to the City of London and getting them to understand a new enterprise asset management software platform. That's very different from going to, let's say, Nestle, Switzerland, and this one facility, right? I mean, the contracts are smaller, but the move to procure is quicker, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring Alisha in and just hold that question as well for her for a little bit later. But Alisha, the rain stick shower, what's it all about and what are you doing in the water sector?
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to share a little bit. First off, yeah, thanks so much for having me. Happy to share some insights. I've actually kind of written down some challenges so I can talk a little bit about that, more specific to some challenges that we faced. But also at the same time, this is my story. I think that probably a lot of people share the same challenges as we're talking about with startups. It's very easy to say because you need market research for everything, but in practice, actually gathering that data is very challenging. And so happy to share a little bit about that. But so what we're doing at Rainstick, we're in Toronto. So we created Rainstick actually when we were living out west. A lot of people don't realize this, but in the Okanagan Valley, Canada actually has a desert. And so in this desert, it comes up, I mean, you can find cacti, you can find a lot of really interesting, critters and spiders that you don't typically think about in Canada. But we undergo some water stress. And so through that, a lot of conversations and trying to figure out, what to do. We came up with this concept, and that was 3 or 4 years ago, but really started to take it seriously about 2 years ago, so just short of 2 years ago. So our company is Rainstick, and Rainstick is a recirculating shower. So it takes a fixed amount of water, recirculates it through the system. At the same time, there is a filtration component, and so the water is, clean and clear. That's one thing that we can talk about when it comes to regulatory things, because I know that that was one of the main points. And then at the very end of the shower, the water then flows to the drain, down the drain, and then to the water treatment. And so everyone has their own fixed amount of water. If Sally is showering, she leaves the shower, Joe has their own fixed amount of water. So it's certainly been an interesting, process through the market research. As an entrepreneur, you have this great idea that's going to change the world. And then, you talk to your friends, and your friends always tell you it's a fantastic idea as well. And then, you start building on it, and then you grow attachment to your idea and your product and exactly the way that it's going to look. And then you start talking, to the next layer of the onion, and people aren't quite as sure about a few things, but you've already grown that attachment. And so how do you continue with the product, research and the necessary research that's required? And so, those are some, I think, similarities that people certainly go through. I think one of the things that has certainly helped us along the journey is the fact that, I studied sciences in climate change and development, but my bachelor's is in international business. And so trying to, bring that from a number of years ago back and use some of that knowledge has certainly kind of helped along the journey. So that's a very brief, and I'm happy to share a little bit about some of the things we've been doing, but I'll pass it over to you, to Andrew.
Thank you. All right. And what was it you were doing in Aquatech? I mean, was I correct in saying that you were doing some basic market research there? And what did it bring for you?
So it was very helpful. And I would say it was one of those conferences that really helped us understand a lot. For both myself and my co-founder, we came from passion and we came from, some of this technical expertise, but the water sector is new to us. We don't come from, 10 years of experience and understanding how it all works, through and through, in and out. And so we knew a little bit about what's happening in Canada. We knew a little bit about some of the challenges, but beyond that, we knew very much that we needed to be able to meet with people, suppliers. So potential suppliers is a huge part, but also understand the industry. What sort of players are there? What are people thinking? What are people thinking for the future? We know that the Netherlands is a water management hub, and so, and water innovation, I should say. Canada very much looks to the Netherlands, and so we wanted to understand a little bit more about what the Netherlands is doing, and is that somewhere that we actually need to be? Do we need to move away from Canada and be situated in the Netherlands? So all of these different, questions were definitely helped our process. So went to Aquatech. Actually, I went to I think it was the conference before.
Innovation Forum.
Yes, exactly, and actually participated in, I believe it was a session with yourself and Will. Is that right to say? I believe Will was there as well, Will. And you both had led a fantastic session, and that kind of started it off. But Aquatech was very helpful for us to understand suppliers, because previously we'd just been reaching out, but we didn't really know who was in the market and who could actually build our parts. Understand, what sort of competition and what are people talking about, and also talk to people. I went around, I had my notebook, and I talked to a lot of different people, and so it was very helpful.
Well, you met a few people from the Dutch water sector who are also reaching out internationally, who have also similar products. Sabine from Hydroloop, I think you were talking to for a long time, who does something complementary almost, and she's now moved to the United States, based in Milwaukee, from the Water Council, set up an office there, which was quite exciting. I think most of the people actually on the call today were at Aquatech, so you've got a lot of old friends who you may recognize there. And we also have Annette on the line, who's the boss of Aquatech, so she'll be here. Glad to hear all this this positivity about probably the last physical event that most of us actually went to. So we're hoping to reopen that again pretty soon. Keith, let me come back to you and just build a bridge between the both of you. A lot of the stuff you talked about, Keith, in the introduction was really about almost institutional research about big organizations learning a lot about big markets and the intricacies. But what is it you can provide an SME or a startup coming into the water sector, and how can they really sort of profit from that, given the fact that they don't have a lot of financial resources? That would be an interesting question to explore as well.
And is it possible, just before you answer that question, for me to specifically state some of the challenges that we've experienced?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
just to bring a little bit of context. So I'm hoping that you can answer some of these questions, Keith, for me, because I've written a little bit of a list. All right. When you're gathering market research, how to make sure that you're finding the next layer of the onion. You want quality conversations with people. What we've found, particularly potential resellers like plumbers, bathroom installers, they want to be paid for their time. So they're not just, they won't just hop on the phone with you. Nowadays on Zoom, they really want to be compensated. And so how do you work around that? You now have a whole bunch of data. How do you actually use it to make better decisions? And people expect you to know a thing or two. So at what stage do you reach out to certain people? Sometimes you expect to gather information, but they're expecting to be told information. And so I think setting up expectations. And is there a winning format for market research meetings? So these are some of the kind of challenges I'm hoping maybe, Keith, you can kind of help us through at the same time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that a lot of times, like as a startup, and I started my own company. You do try and do it yourself as much as you can, right? I mean, you do need to know your own market, and you, on the other hand, have a lot of other things that you need to be doing, right? You need to be developing the product, you need to be hiring people and all that. So
marketing, Keith,
and obviously doing marketing. I think getting the next layer of the onion, as a market researcher, we have different techniques. Usually you hire a market researcher that's been around for a little bit, then they probably have set up a network and they have created channels into the market. Maybe it's not, your average plumber down the road, but maybe it's a plumber association, or maybe it's a main client of that plumber that you can speak with, or some related party that has been supplying that plumber with equipment. You kind of triangulate and look for other perspectives. If you can't get that exact perspectives, that's one thing we do. I think another thing is, we try and triangulate between some different sources maybe that you can find online with doing some information gathering from those other sources I mentioned. So, I think for us, it's, if you go directly and you get shot down, which happens to us all the time, it also has to do with sometimes the way that you approach them, right? Because if you can make it worth their while in terms of offering them some kind of exposure, or a lot of times what we'll do is when we put together some interesting things about the market, we will then put together a cut of that, a summary that is useful to whoever participated in providing insight. Yeah. And the other thing is making it pretty brief and to the point, and not too onerous for them to participate, right? I mean, I think a lot of times when you call people and like, do you have 40 minutes for me to run through 70 questions? It doesn't really work that way. So I think the way we work a lot of times, we don't necessarily, sometimes we kind of, we put a higher premium on trying to get a multitude of perspectives, but maybe very incisive and short, versus trying to get maybe a couple people who are the key plumbers who are going to talk to me for 2 hours. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of that in terms of how you set up the gathering of the data. I agree it's a huge point. And we get hired a lot of times because not necessarily you don't know how to do it, but you just don't have time to do it. And maybe we have some techniques or way coming in as an independent party that we can figure out how to make that happen. But it's not easy, especially there are certain markets that are more difficult to penetrate than others. And then, okay, you had a bunch of questions there. The question about the data, did I understand that correctly? Is how is the data getting used, or what did you mean exactly with the data?
Yeah, so for example, we ran our this is one of the first tests that we had done. You know, we were told best practice, you have to listen to your customer. We ended up doing a A/B test on Facebook. All right. So we ran this test in different locations, and we wanted to see click rates and male versus female and who's more interested. And we got a lot of information. I would say the first thing is, as a new startup, it's sometimes scary to hear feedback. And so when you get some of those comments and those questions, we said, oh my gosh, okay, we got to close this down. I don't know how I feel about this. Are we ready to answer all those? Do we want to give this information now on our website? And now we're just in the phase. We're actually going to be putting our website online over the next 2 weeks, because we only have a landing page right now. And we're just at the point where we're able and we're comfortable to answer all of those questions. And so I think once you have all that information, whether it be in the case of ours or another one where you get all this market research in whatever it is, Google surveys or forums, now what do you do with it? And how do you actually make sure that it doesn't just sit on the side of your desk?
Yeah, no, and that's a huge one. I mean, because we've done relatively big projects, and you know, you come back with tons of feedback from the market, and then it just kind of sits there, right? And you know, as a market researcher, it's not that satisfying, because you want to see that advice acted on, and it should help them, right? If you want to create a long-term relationship with that client. And it's true that there are a lot of companies that it's just like a check to, and this is dealing with more like larger corporations, just like a checkbox. They have to have had a market study done. You know, whether they're going to read it or not, they've already decided they just got to have one done, right? So I think that the way you can ensure this stuff gets useful is you have to be super engaged at the beginning of scoping one of these processes. If you're asking whether it's someone doing a Facebook ad or survey or some other kind of survey, you got to spend a lot of time up front. And I've noticed that the clients that we work best with and are most helpful to, they're not the easiest to sell to, because they have a gazillion questions. They're concerned that this money, that they might hire you to do something that's going to sit there. They're concerned that the data they're going to get is not granular enough. That's obviously a huge concern a lot of times. Or it's just going to be like difficult to look at and give you a headache because it's this gigantic database or whatever. So those are things that, excuse me, need to get worked through, I would say, in the scoping process. And then throughout the project, it needs to be structured in a way that you're making sure it's fitting in and protect. And sometimes you need an exit ramp if it's not working, or you need to have a very good collaborative relationship with whoever's doing the research and providing the data to be able to tweak that and make it useful. Yeah.
Whilst you're getting a glass of water, Keith, let me just bring Dragon in here. You were talking to Alisha about the getting some knowledge of the Netherlands, and he's of course in the research area, the head of KWR. Dragon, you have something to share in terms of a product experience you've had?
Yes, this is just an anecdote, but I think it could be very useful to Alisha and who are trying to put a new product out there in the water sector. There is a company that created a smart shower device that goes on the shower hose, and that gives you an information how much water are you using and what temperature, you know, what energy you've been using. And it has a very cute polar bear on it on a little display. And the idea was that you know, by visual kind of feedback, the people will realize how much water they're using. They will shorten their showers. And this comes from one of the water companies who tried the product. So everything looks really good. They have a good marketing. The point was you have to test product through various age groups. And the age group that it failed on, or apparently failed on, was teenagers. Apparently teenagers were pushing the poor bear to die, because if you use too much water, the poor bear goes down. So I would suggest that you do thorough testing on various kind of age structure, people, social structure, whatever, wherever you're going to use it. You mentioned Okanagan Valley in the Western Canada, but it could be that you are focusing on a just particular area, or if it's a general, then you have to go much wider. So much from me, guys. I hope it helps.
Thank you, Dragan. I've got another question related to research. I'm going to come back to you if we've got time in just a moment. But Alisha, how do you reflect on that?
It's certainly, yeah, I think it's great information. And kind of just touching, because, you know, Dragan, you mentioned that you have to do a lot of different research for a lot of different age groups. Certainly is important. I think one of the things that we did very early on is, again, because, you know, you follow the ways of market research where you're like, okay, I gotta get some surveys. You know, I'm gonna send out a survey and I'm gonna try to get as much information as I can. And so one of the things that we did very early on is we sent out a survey to a bulk group of people that we worked with in a co-working space. But the key element that we actually forgot, I would say, or didn't really think about, is the age differentiation. How old are you? You know, household income, things like that, because those are very important in the process. And so we ended up getting a whole bunch of responses, and it was very positive. And I would say the other thing is we sent this survey out to a very specific group. It was like the Social Innovation Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. And so of course they're going to be very positive. And so we ended up then going and taking this data, but this data was kind of flawed, and we ended up continuing to build up the product based on that. And then we went back and we realized, wait a second, this isn't exactly that target market. And so I think it's very useful. The other thing is people always say, well, who is your target market? And so at the beginning, when we said, well, I mean, if you look at like North America alone, there's 150 million households. There's so that you could go hotels, you could go, you know, households, but you could go developers, fitness centers, community centers, but where do you actually spend the most amount of your time? And this has been the opportunity, but also the challenge. And with COVID, it's been a particular challenge in how being able to get that. And then also focusing your efforts in a strategic launching point, which we have now decided is Southern California.
Keith, could you, as Bluefield Research, have been of assistance at that stage, or do you kind of only work for large corporations? I mean, could you have helped structure that research, maybe for Alisha to do it herself, but would you have come in there and just given some advice, or is that just a little bit too small for your organization?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've definitely worked with startups, and I think those are some of the most fun and interesting projects to work on, because if the project is scoped well at the beginning and there's a lot of interaction, it can make a huge impact, because for all the reasons you said, Alisha, I mean, it's very easy to get stuff that you don't know what to do with it, or you get stuff that you feel like you should be researching the market, but on the other hand, you can't necessarily get at the exact data you want. So, I mean, we've worked with companies to, identify customers or pare down the market and find that target market. And you're right, that's huge. There's the market, and then there's like the addressable. There's like everything out there, and there's the addressable market, and then there may be, okay, and then within that addressable market, this is like the $100 million that I could potentially try and get, but my targets, that's where you rubber hits the road, right? And then you're saying, all right, well, let's see if we can sell X amount of units over the next few years based on what you're telling me. And then you pick away at those assumptions. Well, how'd you come up with that? And why would we be able to compete with these companies? And there's a whole competitive aspect to bring into it as well, right? When you're trying to set targets. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely, Andy, I mean, we've worked with smaller companies where there's a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty meaning just because of the vastness of the market, and it is so huge, and there's so many different places you could go, that I think we can definitely be of help. I mean, saying too small it's all relative, because you could be, because we're very small maybe for a huge corporation, and they only want to hire the most gigantic McKinsey or generalist consultancy, which then turns around and buys our research sometimes. Or we could be considered relatively decent size, and if it's a small company just starting up, then we can help them out. So
good to
definitely
know.
open to that.
Alisha, any reflections on that? Because I have another question. If not, all good.
Yeah, I think that's great. I do have a question, but maybe that's a little bit down the road is how often, because there's research for customers, competition, your channels, how you're going to establish those, regulatory compliance, pilots, you name it. How often should you be undertaking this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to take it one by one. I mean, I'm sure you probably wake up in the morning and are like, where do I start? I mean, I got to do 50 million things, right? And so, I think it depends on where you're at in the cycle in terms of developing your product, determining what that target market is. Have you started selling? Have you opened up, sales channels or not? Is your marketing plan already pretty well developed or not? And depending on where those sort of different work streams are in terms of maturity and how much resources you have assigned to them, it can make more or less sense to be getting more feedback from the market or just act on what you have right now, and I think as well, there's certain things that are probably changing like monthly. I don't know if you're looking at case counts of COVID-19 and how that's impacting water use, and if you're looking at something that's changing all the time, that's one thing where you want to keep updating it. But if we're looking at regulations for water conservation, those probably change not as often, right? So those types of things. Or if you're looking at your customers and what your customers are doing or getting feedback from them, you might want to do that at least a couple times a year, I would say. So it kind of depends, right?
Okay. Let me just say, if you've got any questions, please send them to me in the chat, and we can deal with those. We're going to go into a Q&A session in about 5 minutes time and just extend for a few more minutes. But I'd like to come to one topic now, which is how do you match your research with the more fundamental research into different technological solutions for different problems, and bring Dragon in at that stage, obviously working a bit further upstream, if you like. And can we build a bridge between learning what the market needs and the R&D institutes that Dragon represents, so things are less tech driven and more market driven? Keith, how do you work with organizations like KWR, and is there room for building that bridge a bit stronger?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's definitely room, and we have massive respect and we learn tons from them because they are the seed at which the industry improves, right, technologically. So they're very much cutting edge, looking to innovate. I think where we come in is trying to understand enough, and and I don't mean to say that all water innovation is being developed in a vacuum, right? I mean, clearly the whole point of getting some early R&D funding for a project is that there has to be an inkling of a demand for it, right? But there are complexities when you go from the lab, obviously, to the market, and I think that's where we can complement, because we're not hydrochemical engineers necessarily, or hydraulic engineers, but we understand markets. So I think we try and learn enough that makes us dangerous, but at the same time understanding that if this product needs to perform a certain way, we're not necessarily going to go on a test bench with them and figure that out.
Dragon?
Yeah, I've learned enough of marketing to be dangerous as well. Yeah, the key here is the willingness to work together, and the ability of bigger research organizations like ours to have our own labs, something that smaller organizations do not have, but they may come with ideas for a niche product or something else, and that's where the link between kind of bigger research organizations and innovators comes in. Not all of innovation comes from us either, but we have the ability to work with people like that. And then I think one more thing that I would mention to Alisha and everybody wanting to innovate in this area is business models. If your product requires intervention by a plumber, then you have to find a way to build them into your business model, so they're incentivized to promote or install your product. So there are lots of things that work. We are WHO Center for Water Quality and Health Testing, and we've tested all of these smaller devices that goes into homes, and we've seen lots of different ones. And it's not the technology itself that sells everything. It's what the people will accept in the end. So I always remind people of Betamax and VHS. Some of you people are too young to remember that, but Betamax was much better system, good, better, higher quality. But VHS won because it was open source, given to everybody. So I'll stop there.
That's fabulous. And it sounds like there was an offer in that message as well, Alisha. What have you learned maybe today? And also, what are the next steps for the rainstick shower?
Good question. I think as far as learnings for today is there maybe are some ways that are more affordable for startups to get market research, perhaps. And that might be a conversation offline. But I think the other thing is to look at, be creative about the process. I really like that last point that Dragan just made about it's not necessarily the tech, it's more about the adoption and what people will accept. How do you gain that acceptance from your customer? And looking at different ways in the business model, I think is really, really important. I think the other thing that I was thinking about is just, as startups, sometimes it can be challenging because you're building a product that's supposed to be for everyone. And sometimes you have to say, wait a second, because that's the thing, is also because it's so expensive in water tech, there's often a long time before you get to market. You're trying to, gain investment, and you're trying to, do all of those things. And so your product is supposed to be for everyone, but maybe you need to take a step back and say, who is this really for? And where is that market adoption? How is this market research going to be able to help us get that one, niche market at the very beginning? So I think continuing that.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of questions. We're going to go into that right now, but let me give a quick plug for the next couple of sessions we've got on KnowH2Ow. The spin-off on July the 16th in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have Piers Clark on talking about the very interesting story of Isle Utilities, itself a spin-off from Thames Water. And there's some things in there which some of you may know and some probably don't. So that would be quite interesting, because we also have a spin-off organization talking about their marketing challenges as they've broken off from a big engineering group, and how they can carry on a certain amount of heritage, but also be a free spirit and gain some independence. And then we're going to carry on with our social media sessions as well, and have one of the co-authors of The Social CEO, who Damien Corbett introduced to us in a session a few weeks ago. Very, very interesting book, which you must read. But Sarah Walker-Smith will be on there, and she's one of the most interesting people in the social media space, for me at the moment at least, and she'll be telling her story and a couple of other topics coming up later in August as well. So let's go to a couple of the questions. I realize that some people will have to drop off because our official time is up now. But one question we had here was around the digitalization question, Keith, that actually Alisha started to pose a bit earlier. I'm going to put it in a slightly different context here, because the question is around how can you use digital tools to make research data like you provide more digestible? You talked about some of the large corporations just basically ticking the box and saying, yeah, we've done some market research, but how can that, digitalization be used to actually assist that process?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good one, because it is like drinking from a fire hose, as they say, when you get data, and it will just sit there. So a few things. One is, visualizing data better. I mean, there are a lot of tools out there now, whether you're using Tableau, or we have a data navigator where you can visualize a lot of data. It's run off of SciSense, which is another data visualization. So I guess giving them tools, you have to do a training. You can't make it too complicated. You have to break it down into some basic intuitive functions that make data visualization easier. Luckily, the market has evolved a lot, I would say, just in the past 5 years. I think the other thing is just getting to the point, and Andy, you know this very well as a marketeer. I mean, just using less words is better sometimes. And I think, the days of, I used to do market research and we'd have to submit these reports that weighed like 10 pounds or, these door stopping volumes, and people don't really digest information like that anymore. I think you really have to study your client and make your market researcher understand, like, this is how I want it. It needs to hit these points, and and your market researcher should have a sense of what is going to make that more digestible for you based on the time you have and the questions you ask.
Can we go into a case study? It is public knowledge that you've done some work with Xylem in this space. I don't know to what extent you can talk about it, but because you're talking about digesting research. So Xylem have come up with some tremendous reports. Tell us a little bit about that, as much as you can at least, and how that whole collaboration came about.
Yeah, so I mean, Xylem and several other OEMs of different equipment, and they're also software provider, have a lot of capabilities. But companies like that, I mean, I think they realize that the industry is vast, and they saw that we were focused on some areas of interest. I think it was looking at first at U.S. Capital investment in projects, and we did a lot of work crossing data sets and coming up with different scenarios and coming up with some useful tools there in terms of data and insights for their business planning. So I think born out of that relationship, looking at some of the North American markets, but then also, it's a very global company, and we offer a coverage of a lot of other markets as well. So, I think there aren't that many. There are research companies that cover water. I think all of them have their own kind of take in terms of what they sell. Is it a report? Are they doing events? Are they doing a service? And I think in our case, we chose some specific geographies and ways of presenting our information and applying a certain analytical model that has made it useful. And we've also been pretty flexible in the way that we work with our clients as well, because knowing that the industry is so vast means that you're going to have to personalize a lot of things to make it fit what they're exactly working on.
Excellent. Okay. Alisha, I'm going to give you scope for one more question if you have one. If not, give me your takeaway sort of summary of how startups and maybe smaller organizations should approach SMEs, some of the main points which you've made today. But one more question if you want, and then we'll have Keith give his final words before we sign off.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we've gone through some of my questions here. I would just leave off with saying, I think when you, as an entrepreneur, when you get into this entrepreneurial space, you just are so focused on your product. But I think as you start to develop your product, it's really easy to get stuck on other side things and move away from what people are, what you're actually building. I think it's really important to constantly talk to people. And if it's something that I think that we have certainly tried to keep on doing, but it's very difficult to do. And so I think being able to have that established research, to talk to people who really know what they're doing very early on, that can support in that regard, I think it only helps. I think, as an entrepreneur, get in front of as many people as you can and keep talking to people, but at the same time, listen to what they're saying. And be able to apply it. And that's sometimes challenging for startups when you're so tied, your heart and soul is in this product that you're developing. And so be willing to throw it aside if it needs to and start something else. So yeah, very, very helpful to continue this market research conversation. And Keith, thank you. Andrew, thank you. And Dragon, thanks for your insights, and for everyone that's here. Very interested in continuing the conversations. So thank you.
Keith, final words from yourself.
Yeah, no, thanks again as well for having me. It's been very interesting to hear from you guys. Alisha, I think you're tackling with your product a very interesting space. I mean, just the way the impact that it could make if it sees stronger adoption. And so, if there's any way that we're able to help out with that. Maybe offline we can catch up with that. I'm glad everybody recognizes there is a need for market research, because sometimes if it's not well used, people have a bad experience with it, and it becomes one of those things that is just kind of a nice to have, and people kind of go with their gut feel. So appreciate the listening and the questions, and hopefully it was interesting for you guys as well.
Well, it was for me, certainly, a representative of the audience. Thank you. And I really hope that we can carry on this conversation, because as I said already at the start, it really makes it very difficult when you're developing some kind of a marketing strategy when basically you're flying blind. So in Germany, they say here that health isn't everything, but without health, everything is nothing. And you can use that same phrase for market research. It's not everything, but without it, it really is really tough to keep going and doing things. So thank you so much for everyone's attention. And let's maybe see you in a couple of weeks together with Piers Clark, and a very interesting case study also from Canada on spin-offs. So have a wonderful rest of the day. And thanks again, Keith and Alisha, for joining us. Dragon, thanks for your words. And we'll see you all soon.